So my name is Brian. I hack the docs at a small big data startup called Rokana, and I have a pretty interesting set of problems. Our engineering team is really hardcore. They like to do everything in source. I'm told that I have to single source all of my content to the greatest extent possible, and we have a lot of complex reference content that we need to manage that needs to get put out into a whole lot of different places. What am I talking about by complex content is anything that's parameterized. It has a key and a value. So say a glossary has the term and the definition. We all recognize that. A bibliography might hide some of the keys, but it's still, what it's doing is it's evaluating the keys and giving us their values. Here's the keys behind a bibliography. And this is the real bugbear that I'm trying to tackle, which is configuration setting and API setting content. The developers keep it in one place in the code, and then it has to come out in a whole bunch of other places. So I've tried to find a way to single source that, and I've built a tool that I've open sourced and that you all can use if you find it useful. The requirements were that it has to be able to output in any source. It has to be single sourced in one place to start with. It has to be in the same version control and source control as our product, because the different settings apply to different versions of our product. And the only way that I can, as a single docs manager, maintain all of that is if it somehow aligns in the same system. And then we need to be able to manipulate and sort that data as well. So the first thing I would do is try to go to a database, but there's just a bunch of reasons that that doesn't work, and I need to speed through. This is normally a 10-minute talk, so. The next thing would be DITA. DITA calls this stuff reference content, and you can design your own, and then you can have it put out in different places. But my trick is I've got more than a dozen developers who handle just this kind of data that I need them to manage themselves, because I don't want a ticket to go and change a number somewhere and then submit that through a PR process. They can just do that and submit it to me if we can find a common source that makes sense to keep this information in. So we want to do this in flat files. We want to do it with open source software that's extensible, and we want to kind of have control of this tooling. Our engineers just demand this. So the solution I've built is called Liquidoc. It's a little Ruby script, and it just takes a few little things like a YAML file for my data source, a liquid file, that's the T there, biblio.asciidoc for the template. I'll show you that in a second. And then it's going to spit out something called biblio.adoc, which is ASCII doc source that I can then produce into PDF, HTML, or any other kind, man pages, anything I want, including inside the UI. So this is for my bibliography that I showed you. This is actually for a book I'm writing. This is two of my favorite books that came out in the last couple of years. I keep them in this YAML structure, and then I create a really ugly but kind of awesome liquid template. And you can see some of those variable names are in here. And when my tool processes these together, it spits out a more readable but still source code and still flexible ASCII doc version. Now, I can turn that into anything I want. The first thing I usually turn it into is HTML. But keep in mind, I've kept this data in discrete formats and these little clusters of data, so I can do cool things like this. I can add a tooltip in my docs that is aware of just the information and just the form for that book that I want, because I can also spit everything I just showed you. The YAML file that I started with can come out as JSON just with one click, and that goes into the app, or we could do it as XML. But in showing you these, I also show you what I avoid, all this extra tag and markup that neither I nor the engineers want to actually deal with. The YAML makes that a lot more elegant and lightweight. So then we spit this out into the UI. I put it into my docs in any format that we want. And we can rearrange it, we can restructure it, and everybody seems kind of happy, and it's not too much of overhead for the engineers to maintain the docs in that place. So everything I just described was a brief version of what I have documented in, I think, chapter 13 of a book I'm writing called Code Writing. It's open source on GitHub. You can go check it out now. This tool helps build the book, so you're welcome to have it and play with it. And you can reach me this way, and I'd be happy to help anybody figure it out. It's pretty rudimentary, but if it would help you, I'd be happy to help you use it. Thanks.
How you all doing? I can't bleeping hear you. I apologize to the sound guy. Sorry about that. I should have done this. Hello, I have no voice left. It has been a beautiful time with a lot of emotional ups and downs. And Tiny Rick. I can't even get a single screen on my thing right now. It's just been one of those fun days. I can't even remember how you escape over to here to do this, to force the same display, because of course I'm set up for work, like we all are. And let's face it, I'm trying to get to the slides. I'm trying, but I can't just like leave it dark. I spent 4 years in radio, and that's part of what I'm getting to today. Not the 4 years in radio, and not even the part where, there we go, now we got it. Not where this thing decided to add a slide. Nope, take it out, there we go. Ladies and gentlemen, we finally have, documentarians are the best audiences. So this started as a real presentation, and it was the original, and as one of my friends from Tulsa pointed out, that the lightning talk is the poetry slam of the geek world. The original point of my slam was to talk about tech support tickets as an historical resource for knowledge articles you can read. It's Falatino, so when things are a box like this, that's called, and there's a space in the middle, and there's another thing, that's a quincunx, because there's 5 of them. And so I got hung up on my own stuff. And then I was at another thing, and someone pointed out, oh yeah, the KCS model, that's everything you're talking about. Right, because that's where I learned it. Here's the link. I have nothing to produce. Minu, what do I do? Meow, that's one of my cats. She farts a lot. So I suddenly am starting to feel out of my league. I was at a thing like, oh, we're all support people. I'm totally gonna relate. This person ran a team of 300 support people. The biggest support team I've been on was 50, and that was at IBM. I've been everywhere. I've been with the angel and the devil, AKA HP. I worked at BMC Software. I had 7 bosses in 7 years. Some of them didn't even share my continent. I never met most of them in the real world. So we all come from similar backgrounds about this, and we're all on strange roads. And so, of course, I got neurotic, because you get neurotic. I started licking my wounds, and I started thinking about all the stuff about, well, question the void. What isn't the problem? And if you don't know about this stuff, this is great for problem solving. I've been using it forever. I even solved the problem of what's for dinner using Kepner-Trago's problem-solving questions. But we don't have a lot of time. What we have here is some of the best modeling. This comes with Keynote, this picture. And so all I had to do was add a couple of things here and there to keep the defaults. And this is Amit sick as bleep. This is great. So I'm thinking, all right, I had a moment of clarity. And of course, you can tell, I perform. I make other extroverts reconsider their lives. It's just what I do. If I stood up straight, you wouldn't be annoyed. But the point is, we've all come from this. Every single one of us in this room is dealing with weird issues, and none of us expected this. Many of us studied Marxist theory in school, and we just want to go back and bridge those gaps. And that's what I do. I put these people together. I put this stuff to a weirdness. Where am I now? I'm dealing with a team that's in Sweden. I learned how to read this sign. It basically says, sidewalk closed, go cross the street the other way. But more than all that, we're all these guys. We're all the penguin on the very formal horse. We're all going through, that's my desk. We are all going through this amazing, I know, I'm done. This amazing thing of trying to figure out how to slam it together. We're all tired from all of this, but we've all gained far more than we could have expected, and I want to thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I have conference crud from a conference last week, and I can't hear that well, so I can't tell if I'm being obnoxiously loud or insanely quiet. So my name is Ariel Niedzielski, and I work at a company called ServiceNow. And I'm the developer portal content owner. And so we've been doing a lot of work on our developer portal recently, which includes things like API documentation and white papers, and also has kind of traditional learning content. So are there folks in the audience here who consider themselves to be kind of traditional learning content training people? Yeah, a few. I know we could argue philosophically about whether or not all the words we put on our site are training or not, but when we were revamping our developer portal, we had a lot of feedback from our users that they thought our training content was the weakest point. And so we wanted to take a look at how we could make it better for them. So the number one thing that our customers hated is we basically had a course offering. I've made kind of a wireframe of what our course offerings look like. And yeah, it was kind of this experience. And the thing was, if your area of interest is here, guess what you had to do to get there? You started there, and then you went to there, and so on and so forth, and nobody ever made it to here. So, right? Yeah. So the thing is, we would say, and we mumbled something about this at the top of our page that said, well, if you're not sure where to start, we suggest you start top left and work your way left to right, top to bottom, which makes total sense, right? So let's ask somebody if that makes sense if they speak Arabic or Hebrew or Chinese, right? So it was a bad design to start with. We also had a problem in that we had some bad terminology. And I see this all over the web in training where all the courses are made up of modules. Only I don't think people who write that word know what it means. We are people who work with words, and we know the importance of saying what we mean, right? Modules mean they can be disassembled and reassembled in another order and still work. Well, most online training is not like that. The other big thing that haunted our users is if they were diligently trying to make their way down here, nobody ever made it. Any mistakes they made early on impacted them the rest of the time, and so they could never make good progress. The other sort of pedagogical thing that I hated about our content is we were teaching people that the process of developing applications was very, very linear, and that if you wanted to develop an application, you did this, and then you did this, and then you did this. And that's not how applications work. You know, we tend to think of technical people as lacking creativity and inventiveness, but that's not true. The process of creating an application is actually very, very, very creative. And there's no right or wrong process order for doing it. So we set out to remove the linearity. And to do that, we introduced this concept called learning plans. The more common industry language is learning path. Paths are linear. You can't get to the end of a path without going through all the previous points. So we have these learning plans. And the secret sauce for us was that we were able to integrate with a GitHub repository. I love Git and all of its various varieties. Thank you, GitHub, who sponsored this conference. We use you a lot. We were able to make our content, our modules, truly modular by using this integration to GitHub, which allows our students to enter in at any point into our modules. We don't really presume any prerequisites other than the ability to navigate in our UIs. And we also allow students to self-serve on solutions if they get stuck by looking up the answers in our GitHub repository. So I grabbed this one off of our website. Every module has this thing like here where it says exercise, prepare your instance for workflow. So this is a lab they do right away that walks them through how to connect to the GitHub repository and load up the information that they need. And you can't see it on the screenshot, but every module also ends with a lab for committing their work to their own GitHub repository. So they have a record of their work. We've had feedback from students that not everyone's great with GitHub, and they're finding it kind of confusing. I'm out of time, so I'll just say we've beta tested an app at our user conference last week that allows us in our own software to obtain a GitHub token to their GitHub accounts, and we can manage all of the GitHub actions for them. So instead of that lab where they had to go through and do all those steps, they'll be able to say, set my lab up, and off they go. So thank you very much for your time.
Okay, quick confession, I put this together in like 5 minutes. Well, no, it took me longer than that, but I had very little time to put this together, so I apologize if it's a little unpolished. I had the Lightning Talk sign-up sheet thrusted at me, and that somehow convinced me to come up here. So when talking about accessible docs, I am talking here about making docs available and usable by people with disability, or in a broader sense, by as many of your users as possible. As a whole, I know that it's like late in the afternoon. I hope you don't fall asleep. This is the required cute animal picture in all of my presentations. Okay, so I want everyone to think about the different types of disabilities that people might have. This might be visual, so other than blindness, this might also refer to people who have difficulty with judging distances, as well as even focusing. Hand-eye coordination might be part of it. Auditory, also, other than deafness, might also refer to other hearing issues, such as difficulty focusing on a single voice. It might be physical or motor, and examples include not only being able to grip something, but also even with precise movements. Touch is actually a really interesting one because it actually refers to the lack of sensation in touching. Learning is a really, really large umbrella term, but includes things like dyslexia and other reading disabilities, and as well as dysphasia and other related issues with writing. So there's a lot. So the question is, why should you care? I mean, other than the fact that you know, it's good to be inclusive. According to the US Census, 16.5% or almost 30 million adults have a disability. This means that the number of people with a disability is larger than any single group of ethnic or visible minority in this country. That's a lot of people. I'll also just mention that legislation might apply. I'm not a legal expert, and it can get really complicated, so I won't get into it here. But I will just also mention that just because you're in a private company doesn't mean it doesn't apply to you. Just look up Target. When talking about developing anything, whether it's docs or software or whatever it is, for excessive or for people with disabilities and being accessible, most people will think of assistive technology. I just want you to think about not only the typical screen readers is what most people talk about, but there are things like joysticks and other pointers. You might want to think about people who only use a keyboard. There's touch screens, which if there's anyone in this room that wouldn't be able to raise their hand if I asked you whether you used a touchscreen in the last week, I'd call you a liar, probably. And there's lots of other assistive technology. We all actually use some kind of assistive technology almost every single day. We just don't think about it that way. So I'm glad that someone brought this up at some point in the conference. Thank you. So one of the things too that are kind of like, I'll say a special consideration is color contrast or considering color blindness. And the main thing with color contrast is to make sure that color is not the only way you are getting the message across. A great way to test this, of course, is to just see what it looks like in grayscale or even black and white. Some other things to include is anything media. So this might be, and I really do mean any kind of media. So that might be images, which might include flowcharts, diagrams, might be audio, might be video. You basically should have some kind of text-based alternative. Images typically have alt or alt text, but for things like flowcharts and diagrams, you might have a bulleted list, a data table, or some other text. For audio and video, you typically have a text transcript, and that's a good alternative. If you have videos, captions are always good as well. Very, very quickly, interactions or interactivity. Elements, sliders, accordions, anything where you would click on an element to reveal blocks of text or something similar. Think about having a way to visibly hide the text from visual users, but wouldn't hide it from screen readers. Typically, this involves using some CSS with absolute positioning. I won't get into it, but there are lots of references for that. Guideline docs, just very quickly, there are lots of resources out there for both print guidelines and for web guidelines. And this is just a couple of examples. I'll have my slides available later. I will also say that testing and user feedback is your key. There is nothing that can replace automated testing. And your takeaway for today is if you actually follow clear usability guidelines, be clear, helpful, usable, accessible, easy to understand, designed with people in mind first, you'll get there. Don't worry.
Hi, everyone. So let me start out with a question. How many of you have a job title that is not tech writer? Show of hands? Wow, I knew there'd be hands, but that's more than I expected. I love Write the Docs because from the very beginning, the organizers have understood that there are a lot of people involved with writing the docs, not just tech writers. And when I spoke here the first year, I was not a tech writer. I was a program manager working with tech writers back then. Well, I'm a tech writer now, and I'd like to share with you 5 of the things that I have learned over the last 5 years that have been really important. We'll start with a lesson from 2013. I had to let go of the words. I love prose, I love writing elegantly, but nobody wants to read it. Everybody's in a hurry to do their thing. So I've had to get good at being concise and quick. And this book, if you've never read it, you should really go down the block to Powell's right now and get a copy. It is the most amazing, helpful book I've ever read in my career. I learned so much about how to consider my audience's needs. In 2014, I made a little detour and tried to write code, and I learned that is not the same as writing about code. I thought I had to be able to be decent at writing code in order to write about code, and thank goodness that's not true because I hated it. I'm glad some of you love writing code, but it was terrible for me. But let's consider, what's different about these two things? Well, who is your audience if you're writing code itself? Excuse my art ability, but you're writing for your computers. They will very happily read every single thing you give them. They will chase down every last rabbit hole. I cannot do that. As a reader, I get even 10% through that, and I'm so lost and frustrated and confused. So in 2014, I learned that writing for humans means letting them think they understand everything. Don't break that illusion. Use your levels of abstraction. The year after that, in this very room, I learned that nobody was reading my super important callouts because they looked like ads. And I don't have my speaker notes, and I'm completely blanking on the name of the guy that gave this talk, but he was pointing at his very important call out and how people just skip over it. So I thought, well, if they're not going to read that because it looks like an ad, how do I get them to read my really important thing? The suggestion I have, and this isn't the final answer, but maybe use bullet points. Because when you're using bullet points, they scream, valuable, concise information lives here. When I'm reading a doc, I just instantly go to the bullet points. So even if the point doesn't have to be in a bullet point, maybe you can sneak it in there. 2016, I learned that when I'm awful at delegating, I need to examine why. It turned out that as a program manager, I was terrible at delegating because I wanted to write the docs. So I finally made it official, and I admitted I am a tech writer. It feels good. And finally, this year, what I'm learning and I'm still working on is how to respect my SME's time, but to respect my time too. I have a bad habit of really puzzling out things instead of asking questions because I'm so afraid of quote unquote wasting an engineer's time. But if I'm writing good docs, I'm saving their time. And if I get answers faster so that I can write more good docs faster, I'm saving more of their time. So I'm working on that this year. So those are my 5 things, but I want to leave you with one last bonus idea, which is to have a personal motto. I forget exactly when I came up with this, but my personal motto, and I live by this. As a tech writer, my modus operandi is to figure out how everything I say can be misinterpreted and fix it. Thank you all.
Okay. So people who have been coming here in the last, ever since we were at the Crystal Ballroom, and I've actually had these conversations quite a few times during this conference where what's the deal with the floor and why is it so bouncy? So we decided to talk about this, and the reason why we decided to talk about this is because Rose and a couple other people, a few of them left, a few of them are still here. We are dancers, in addition to being nerds, which is, it's an interesting, yeah. Okay, any other dancers here? Who dance to things? Yeah. So, is it working?
So
cool,
close.
All right.
So close.
Going over to
Yeah, there we go.
We love technology.
That's cool. Also, I forgot the speaker notes are off the screen, so this is going to be really exciting. We did this in 15 minutes, so get super excited for this in-depth research that we have done for you.
You have the speaker notes here?
No, they're on there. It's fine. So if you just haven't heard my name yet, my name is Rose Williams. You can find me on Twitter and many other places, both of good and bad repute. And I am a technical writer at ThreatStack. Now they have gotten their money's worth. I have said their name out loud on a stage. So my marketing person is going to be very pleased. Yeah, and I like to nerd out for dance. So actually, Kate Voss, who I affectionately refer to as my platonic life partner, dragged me dancing a year and a half ago, and she loves it when I tell this story, and it's my favorite story. And the first time she took me dancing, she was like, I'm gonna meet you for the dance lesson. It's gonna be so great. I'm gonna learn the other dance role. And then I get a text 10 minutes in, hey, I don't think I'm gonna be able to make it. I'm just gonna meet you at the social dance. And I had already paid, so I was stuck. It's a year and a half later, so I'm officially really stuck. And now, Mikey, you get to nerd out. Ooh.
Oh, you have your speaker notes here.
Hey.
Yeah, but how do I switch the slides?
I have no clue.
This is your computer.
Right.
So I actually, I started dancing Lindy Hop swing dancing in 2012, and I actually got to that dance through singing because I've been a singer all my life. And the people, I was singing in a cabaret, and the cabaret dancers were dancing swing, and I'm like, what is this amazing thing that you're doing? I would like to try this too. And it's a social dance, it's a partner dance, and then I crossed over a little bit after that to Balboa and blues dancing and West Coast swing and all the different kinds of, vernacular
Represent
jazz.
all the dance crews.
Yes,
yeah.
all of them, and I studied Latin for a little while, and then I left, and I'm back to swing, and yes.
Cool. So this is why the floor moves. This is what they call a sprung dance floor, or a floating dance floor. It has what they call, ready? I pulled this directly from someone else's site, buildingdesignindex.co.uk, so that is their credit. Known as the basket weave, it's a cotton batten configuration. If anybody wants to explain precisely what that is, it's not really clear, and you will see why later. It comprises of 3 layers of highly flexible US softwood battens placed on top of each other at right angles. Did anyone get that?
This is very badly documented on the internet.
It really is. The intermediate layer acts as a spring to the top layer, which is laid at the center of the span formed by the intermediate layer over the bottom layer. Ready? Gets better. So.
What does all that mean, actually?
Yeah.
How does that affect your body? When you dance, let's pretend you're dancing on a concrete floor. You jump, there is nothing to absorb the shock of your jump. And then the shock gets right up to your body, and it can hurt your ankles, your back, and other parts of your body. So this floor acts as a shock absorber, kind of like in your car, right? So it helps you dance longer and protects your body.
Then there's all these things that I found out. So this was patented in 1905 by Charles R. Hunt. Yeah, Hunt. And this particular hall was built in 1914. So I thought that was kind of cool. And I believe this is pronounced cotillion, so it was originally Cotillion Hall. It has a sordid history, which I thought was really cool, going through the jazz era, the Depression, and a bunch of other stuff until the 90s and when it was bought and restored. So you should look that up. It's on their site. So that comes from the Crystal Ballroom stuff. And I think it's the only one on the West Coast, but that seems to be a little bit iffy, according to Wikipedia. So if anyone actually wants to chase down that rabbit hole and tweet me, I would appreciate it.
We need some verifiable news on this.
Right. Just spreading Wikipedia. I did follow through some of the sources, but I only had 20 minutes, so. Cool. We don't have sound. This is what we were mucking around with earlier. So we're going to show you some really cool dancing. And also, for whatever reason, the anchor didn't stick. So this is actually classic Lindy Hop. I believe 1920s, 1930s styles.
Yeah,
This is Whitey's Lindy Hoppers. Which
And it's from a movie called Hell's a Poppin'. It's the first time you actually saw Lindy Hop with breakaway and air steps in the film industry. So this was what broke out this dance. It was invented in New York in the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem. And this was the breakout. So you don't need sound to be impressed by this. We're good. We're going.
This is why. Oh, maybe.
Just leave it. Don't touch it.
It's fine. We're not going to do it. This is why you need sprung floors.
If
Because your body will die. You will lose all of your cartilage and you will hurt for forever. Like, for serious though, people did this in real life. Like,
yeah.
This is why this is happening. And I get that it's sucky for drinks. But
yeah, but just imagine
drink faster.
When you go to a conference and you stand around on a concrete floor, after a couple days it's hurting your back. So when you're walking on this floor, it makes you be more body aware. And when you're standing around, with your standing desk and your laptop taking notes, it's actually better for you.
Anyway, yeah. Super important for body, yay. That's what the notes say. I have the YouTube link in the slides. I'll put them on Twitter. And yeah.
You can watch this. We will post these
scandalous. Yeah, so the TLDR is sprung or floating floors exist to help people avoid injuries so that they can dance longer. Also, if you want your heels to stop hurting, if you're like me, when I stand around, I'm likely to go back in my heels, which is really bad posture. Try putting your weight on the ball of your foot like you're about to punch somebody. It makes you really prepared for anything life has to throw at you, and it keeps your heels from hurting. So I'm Rose Williams. This is
Mikey, Ariel.
And thank you for joining us for Lightning Talks.